Welcome back. Honestman here to preview Champions Meeting number 11, the Pisces Cup. CM11 will be our biggest stat check yet. Not only is it 3,200 meters, but it's also heavy turf conditions, which is going to affect both HP consumption and power. The track is the Hanshin 3200, which starts with the outer track and finishes on the inner track. We'll look at the beginning of the track first. Noteworthy here are the slopes. The mid-race has both a downhill and an uphill, which is good because that provides the most options for recovery skills. Both go-home specialist and restless are in play for end closers and front runners, respectively. The downhill here is 400 meters, which isn't trivial. The uphill is a relatively short 120 meters, but it is quite steep. For the inner track, the late race starts on a straight, so straightaway spurt will be a good acceleration option. We also see a downhill that's 267 meters after the start of the late race, which is way too late for a straight descent to be worthwhile, and that's assuming it didn't already trigger on the downhill in the mid-race. That is a substantial downhill, however, at almost 600 meters. And then finally, we end the race on a 350 meter straightaway, which is a very short straight. That's literally shorter than the final straight in CM9 on the sprint track, which is to say that dueling opportunities will be short-lived. We also see a steep uphill here at the end, which means power might separate winners from losers in the final 200 meters. There aren't any track speed bonuses this time around, but there's going to be a lot of pressure on every stat anyway. With over 1,000 meters of late race, we can't cut corners on speed, and having long S will be extremely valuable. To survive 3,200 meters of heavy turf, high stamina will be essential, and guts helps to alleviate pressure on stamina. The track also has 1,000 meters of downhill, more than half of which is in the late race, so it's going to be extremely hard to skimp on anything here, especially wit. And I mentioned the uphill portions of the track as well as the heavy turf, so we can't skimp on power either. The good news here is that CM11 training should be completely within the new Track Blazer scenario, so scenario power creep will help to offset the high stat demands for this track. The biggest challenge here might actually be how fast folks can master the mechanics for the new scenario. That said, I'd be planning for around 950 stamina, 600 guts, and 2 gold recoveries as sort of an entry point. Best if you can hit 1200 stamina and then possibly scale down to 1 gold recovery, depending on your risk tolerance. For power, as always, the more power the better. I expect some players might end up in the 900 to 1000 range for power, but we'll see how quickly folks can adapt to the new scenario. Similar for wit. A lot of players will continue to treat wit as a bit of a dump stat, but we need to pump those numbers up. I think Track Blazer will mark a point where recommending stat lines will no longer be meaningful. The only useful information will be stamina requirements. Beyond that, the assumption should always be that you're pushing power and wit as high as you can, possibly tilting more towards power for backline runners and tilting more towards wit for frontline runners. In any case though, you should be pushing 4 digits in both power and wit. For instant acceleration options, we have straightaway spurt, which I mentioned earlier, and we see the arrival of Kita-san Black with victory cheer. Beyond that, the pantry is pretty bare, unfortunately. The good news, however, is that Nimble Navigator and No Stopping Me are going to be very high value options for this track. Very favorable track layout to trigger these semi-reliably for anyone in positions 2 through 9. Getting them, however, could be challenging, so you might have to settle for Nimble Navigator. For low-value acceleration options, we have a lot of familiar faces here. Pretty much anything that has a completely random late race activation falls into this category, as well as the late activating skills like Dober and Pump with a 117 meter delay, and that's best case scenario with Pump. I do like Head-On and Slick Surge as potential high return options, but the longer the track, the lower the chance you'll get an activation that's early enough to have a meaningful impact on the race. So looking at the sliding scale of value, I think these are all relatively poor, but we should have a lot of skill points in Track Blazer. So if you have points to burn after buying up your speed skills, your primary acceleration, your greens, etc., then these are definitely worth a look. I definitely would think of them as contingency options though. For Umas, there are literally 50 Umas that could work on this track. We are spoiled for choice compared to the prior 2 Champions meetings, so I'm just going to cherry pick the ones that sort of stand out to me, starting with some end closers who I think will be very strong here. Obviously, there's the perennial free-to-play option Gold Ship who packs a gold recovery, but we also have some new faces here. Majiro Bright will have 2 gold recoveries, and Admire Vega will have a gold recovery and Nimble Navigator. Now, just to be clear, I'm not advocating that people pull for these Umas per se, but if you stumble into them, or if, it's a favorite, I think they have some tools that could be useful here. I think Christmas Oguri is a value pick here because they bring a gold recovery. Part of their unique skill is worth approximately 2/3 of a gold recovery, and you're definitely going to want heals for this track, so skill points spent on recovery skills aren't going to be wasted. A couple of things to note here though. Number 1, if you don't run as Pace Chaser, you lose Gourmand. So just bear that in mind as you're planning your recoveries with Oguri. Speaking of planning your recoveries, number 2, Festive Miracle probably isn't going to give you any late race acceleration. 777 meters is too late, and I don't see a reliable way to get into the early portion of the late race. Maybe someone can crack the code, but I think Festive Miracle is probably going to be a mid-race speed and recovery skill. That's still good, my point is just that you'll probably want to pack some additional acceleration options for the late race, regardless of which position you're playing her. Halloween Rice Shower is particularly interesting here for me because she comes with 2 gold heals and 15% bonuses to her stamina and power. So I think she's a very attractive option, again, especially for folks who are still trying to figure out Track Blazer. I think there's going to be a learning curve there. I don't think people are going to automatically start printing UG Umas. Maybe I'm wrong. That'd be great if I'm wrong. Also for big heal options, this might be the only track where the raw recovery power of Fantasy Grass Wonder can really shine. So if I had her, I'd feel compelled to run her just because you're never going to get a better excuse. Special Week, Summer Spee, Festival Rudolph, Christmas Biwa, and Satono Diamond all have 1 gold recovery and some degree of stamina bonus, making them easier to build than some of their peers. Scarlet, Pasa, Festival Gold City, Summer Maru, Majiro Ardan, and Oguri Cap all have a gold recovery skill but do not have any stamina bonus. I think Oguri is particularly noteworthy because they come with Nimble Navigator, which is going to be more important than ever as we leave Unity Cup. Original Biwa has 2 gold recoveries, but one of them is cooldown, so buyer beware on that. Its timing might not be dependable. Last but not least, Kitasan Black will be the new hotness, and she'll be able to enjoy a fully powered victory cheer, providing an instant 0.3 acceleration at the start of the late race. Building her could be challenging, however, because she doesn't come with a gold recovery, and you obviously can't use her card to train her. So she might be a favorite among whales, but could prove too difficult to build for lower end support decks. Now, you may have noticed Umas that were conspicuously absent from the previous slides. The reason is because these racers have a D aptitude or worse on mile tracks. Inability to run mile is going to make it challenging to train in Track Blazer. That's not to say that these options are just straight off the table, just that you may want to invest in Grandparent Mile Sparks to get the most out of these options. Getting to at least a C aptitude in mile is recommended. B would obviously be better if you can manage it. So plan accordingly. The good news is that we have a lot of time to prepare parents here, since we'll want to wait until the new scenario before training aces. For team building considerations, Nice Nature is real. To be clear, I am not making a recommendation that you should run Nice Nature, or any other debuffer for that matter. I think it's generally best to run 3 aces no matter what. So again, I am not making a recommendation to run Nice Nature. I'm just saying that you're probably going to see some Nice Natures, and you should try to plan accordingly. Something I've seen in various enthusiast communities is a distorted perception of reality. Room matches and scrims aren't real. Room matches represent an extreme sampling bias in favor of the most committed players. In the actual tournament, the level of competition is going to be much lower, and the builds are going to be much more diverse. Many players aren't going to grind out 3 aces, and making 3 aces while on the learning curve for a brand new scenario is going to be very challenging. Not to mention the fact that not everyone has full MLB decks. We have different constraints in terms of our support decks, and debuffers are just an easy way to fill out a team. I'll cite CM7, the Scorpio Cup, as an example. To be fair, that was a medium track, but I think that actually makes my point stronger, not weaker, because my point isn't about whether or not debuffers are effective. My point is about perception not matching reality at the highest tiers of competition. Going into Scorpio Cup, there was a clear sentiment that you shouldn't worry about debuffers. The logic was, don't overstam, because you're hardly going to see any debuffers, so better to maximize your odds and spend resources on the 90% of races that there won't be one, than to try to counter a debuffer on 1 race out of 10. And I think that reasoning is totally sound. The problem is that the perception of debuffers being rare came from sample-biased room matches. What happened in the actual tournament? Well, for me personally, looking specifically at the second round and Group A final, so this isn't biased by the opening round, I saw 18 out of 41 races where there was at least 1 nice nature lined up across for me. So it wasn't 10% of the races, it was almost 44% of the races. And in the final, there were 2 nice natures lined up across from me. Now, fortunately, I built for some extra HP, which allowed me to bring home the platinum, but the guidance going into CM7 from a lot of experts was to try to lowball stamina as a tactical choice. Now, to be fair, our last long track, CM8, had a lot fewer debuffers. I put it at around 15% in my bracket. But CM11 is a different animal. In CM11, I think we're going to see a lot of players forced to lowball stamina, not out of choice, but out of necessity and out of difficulty. Because of that, I think we'll see some opportunists looking to exploit those vulnerabilities, combined with players that are simply padding their team with support characters because they're unable to build 3 viable aces. All of this is to say that I don't know what the narrative will be going into CM11. Maybe it'll actually be super easy to train in Trackblazer, but I would caution against the temptation of cutting it too close on stamina, or at least try to hedge by having at least 1 ace as sort of a stamina mule that can withstand some debuffs, just in case. That concludes my early recon of CM11. Good luck on the track. Thank you all so much. Please like and subscribe. This has been Honestman, and I will see you next time.